Those words, smug and sharp, hit the room like a slap. I stood frozen at the door of my own office, my name, Cassandra Lane, still etched on the glass, watching Griffin Mercer settle into my chair like a king returning to his throne. The problem? It wasn't his. He spun once, slow, deliberate. My chair. My office. My team. Yet here he was, legs crossed in a tailored navy suit, nursing an espresso from my personal mug, the one with a faded UT Longhorns logo I'd had since college. Griffin was 34, son of William Mercer, founder and retiring CEO of Mercer Forge Industries, a mid-sized industrial components company headquartered in Austin, Texas. I was the company's chief financial officer, a role I'd fought tooth and nail to earn over 15 years. I built my career on competence, long nights, and clean numbers, not nepotism and charm. But Griffin never fought for anything. He always knew someone would hand it to him. Griffin, I said, keeping my voice flat. You're in my chair. He looked up, unbothered. Cass, you're just in time. I was about to call you in. He gestured to the chair across from mine, the one where clients usually sat when they were asking for money, not pretending to own the place. Take a seat. We need to discuss the transition. The transition. That was what they were calling it now. What about succession planning, board approval, legal authority? He was skipping all of it. I didn't sit. Griffin didn't notice. Or didn't care. Outside the glass walls, I could see my team, the finance department, pretending to work. But their eyes were on me. On us. Especially Jordan, my senior analyst. She caught my glance, mouthed, "Do we follow his orders?" I gave a slight shake of the head. Not yet. Griffin had spent the last 3 months circling this company like a vulture since William's minor stroke. He'd started popping into meetings uninvited, casually introducing himself to clients as soon-to-be CEO, and offering opinions no one asked for. He even began bringing in consultants, whispering about modernizing the operation and streamlining legacy structures. Translation: gutting the finance team and hiding the theft under consulting fees. What Griffin didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had been preparing for this moment. For months, while he thought I was burning the midnight oil on audit prep and investor reports, I was documenting everything, quietly. Suspicious payments to vague vendors, fake consulting firms, money trails vanishing into shell corporations. It was a slow drip, $15,000 here, $30,000 there. And then it escalated. By the time William landed in the ER, Griffin was moving over $200,000 a month into entities that didn't exist. He thought no one noticed. He was wrong. Griffin leaned back, fingertips steepled like some bad caricature of a tech mogul. Dad built this place from scratch, sure. But he always meant for it to be a family business. When he steps down, it stays in the family. He smirked at me like I was the intruder. Cass, you've done an admirable job. But you know this was always the plan. It wasn't. I knew William. I had sat across from him in a dozen 6 a.m. meetings over black coffee and stale breakfast tacos, solving problems before the rest of the company even woke up. He trusted me more than anyone, except maybe Griffin, who had always been the blind spot in his otherwise razor-sharp judgment. Griffin didn't see me anymore. Didn't see the quiet war I was waging. He didn't even realize he was walking into the trap I had built for him. I just needed him to take one big, obvious step over the line. And then today happened. He picked up the leather folder in front of him, one I hadn't seen before, and slid it across the desk toward me. I'm implementing new departmental controls. You've been overly cautious with growth strategy. I've brought in a new team of consultants. They'll need immediate transfers to on board. He tapped the folder. Start with $700,000. It's urgent. I blinked once. There it was. Griffin, I said softly, sliding the folder open, scanning the fabricated vendor names. You know company policy. Anything over $50,000 requires CFO and board approval. Not anymore, he said. Smirking. As acting CEO, I'm invoking emergency executive powers. My father's stepping down. The board knows this is coming. This is just formalizing it. Emergency executive powers. I almost laughed. This wasn't a corporation in crisis. This was a spoiled child dressing up theft as vision. But the mistake he made, the one that would cost him everything, was holding this meeting in the conference room. Our conference room, equipped with a full audio recording system. And when I saw him walk in earlier that morning and gather my team without notice, I discreetly turned the recorder on. His confession. His plan. The theft. All on record. All mine now. Through the glass wall, I watched as he returned to the conference room to announce his vision to my team, flipping to a whiteboard like he was pitching the next big tech startup. I stood in my office, calm, calculated. I began packing up my desk, not in surrender, but in preparation. I moved like a surgeon, my cactus plant, my photo with William from last year's leadership retreat, my UT mug. Behind the closed door, I opened my secure drive, pulled up the folder labeled Griffin Mercer _set trail. Screenshots. Forensic analysis. A 42-page report from Naomi Chen, the best financial investigator in Texas. A money trail that linked Griffin to 5 shell corporations, each registered to mail forwarding boxes in 4 different states. Total stolen, $2.4 million. And now he was asking for $700,000 more. I drafted the email. Subject line, urgent, fraudulent transfers and corporate misconduct evidence, Griffin Mercer. Recipients, all 7 board members. Including the 2 who never liked Griffin anyway. Attachments, the full forensic report, vendor evidence, screenshots, and the freshly recorded audio. But I didn't hit send. Not yet. I wanted him to feel like he'd won. I wanted him to sit in my chair a little longer. And I wanted to watch it all burn from the inside out. I stood behind the tinted glass wall of my office, the hum of fluorescent lights above barely audible beneath the rising sound of Griffin's voice echoing across the conference room. He had moved on to the whiteboard, scribbling out an org chart, one that placed him at the top, with new lines cutting across departments, replacing decades of stable leadership with chaos branded as agility. My team sat stiffly around the table. I knew them too well, Jordan, Miguel, Devika, even Tom from accounts payable. They weren't buying it. But they were also scared. Not of Griffin exactly, but of what happened next. No one wants to be on the wrong side of a legacy name, even when that name is attached to a fraud in a tailored jacket. Through the glass, I could hear Griffin declare, "We're restructuring operations immediately. New vendors. New capital strategies. We've been leaving money on the table for years." The irony of it punched through me. Money. He'd been bleeding us dry for nearly a year. I had the bank logs, wire transfers, even IP matches to prove it. But Griffin wasn't just greedy, he was delusional. He thought if he wrapped the theft in enough vision speak, no one would notice the gaping hole where integrity should be. Then came the line I had been waiting for. Effective today, we're transferring $700,000 to our new partners at Linear Nexus and Apex Stratagem. We're going all in. Linear Nexus. Apex Stratagem. Shell companies. I knew the names by heart. I had registered DNS logs showing their creation within 48 hours of his father's hospitalization. The sites had fancy words like innovative solutions and synergistic growth, but no real address, no real phone number, just PayPal-linked emails and a one-room shared office in Kansas. "Tom," Griffin said, his voice snapping like a whip, "get those transfers initiated. Now." Tom hesitated. He looked like someone had just asked him to disarm a bomb with a butter knife. "Company policy requires Cassandra's sign-off." "I am the policy now," Griffin snapped, voice sharp. I watched the moment his authority cracked. That was the problem with people who had always been given power, they didn't know how to earn it, or how fragile it really was. Inside my office, I opened the Texas State Business Entity Search. Griffin had filed the incorporation papers for Mercer Holdings LLC just that morning, claiming it absorbed Mercerforge Industries. He forged William's signature, listed himself as managing director, and used the wrong registration ID for the parent company. It was amateur work for a man trying to execute a hostile corporate coup. A notification dinged on my screen. A Slack message from Jordan. He's asking for department logins. Wants admin access. What do we do? I typed back in less than a second. Stall. Say you need compliance clearance. Do not give him anything. Then I turned back to the filing page and took screenshots of every document. The wrong codes. The forged signature. The instant timestamp from the filing server. Griffin hadn't just embezzled. He had committed corporate identity fraud. And I was holding the evidence in my hand. Across the hall, Griffin was laying it on thick now, drawing flowcharts like a man building a house on quicksand. I watched my people nod mechanically, but none of them were writing anything down. It was all show. I pulled open a private encrypted folder and copied everything, every wire transfer, every vendor discrepancy, Naomi's 42-page report, my own logs, the forged documents into a final PDF package. And still, I didn't send it. Not yet. I wanted him to feel it first. At 11:37 a.m., Griffin barged back into my office without knocking. His face was flushed, sweat beading under his collar. Confidence was cracking under pressure. Why haven't you authorized the vendor transfers? He demanded. I looked up slowly from my screen. My desktop background, an old photo of me and William standing next to the first automated rig we developed, felt suddenly symbolic. Because you're not CEO, Griffin. You're just a spoiled brat with a pen and a printer. He stared at me. What did you say? You heard me. Mercer Holdings isn't a real company. Your filings are garbage. Your signatures are forged. You're not a CEO, you're a criminal. The blood drained from his face. He stepped closer, fury now replacing panic. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? My name is Mercer. And that name, I said coldly, is going to end up in headlines tomorrow for a $2.4 million embezzlement scheme. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I stood up, closed my laptop, picked up the manila folder labeled board evidence pack. You've been stealing from your father. From his legacy. And now, you tried to steal from me. From all of us. He staggered back slightly, as if I'd physically struck him. Cassandra, wait. We can fix this. You're brilliant, you can be CFO of the new firm. We'll give you equity. You'll be a partner. He was bargaining. It was over. I don't want your blood money, I said. I want justice. And with that, I hit send. The email sent with a subtle whoosh sound. It felt anticlimactic. But I knew what I had just launched wasn't just a memo. It was a corporate earthquake. 7 board members now had a 52-megabyte file in their inboxes titled, Confidential, Mercer Industries Fraud Evidence. And Griffin? He was still standing in my office, frozen. Something behind his eyes shifted, like he realized the ground was moving beneath him, but he still believed he could stop the fall if he just said the right thing. Cassandra, come on. You're not thinking straight. This will ruin everything. I stared at him. You ruined everything. He opened his mouth again, but I was already walking past him, laptop in hand, cardboard box under my arm, toward the elevator. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jordan rise from the conference table. Her eyes met mine through the glass. She knew. Everyone in that room knew now. Griffin ran after me down the hallway. You're doing this out of spite. You've always hated that I'm the next in line. I didn't turn. I didn't need to respond. The board would answer that accusation for me soon enough. As the elevator doors closed between us, I saw him finally crack. Not rage. Not smugness. But fear. Pure, desperate fear. I walked 3 blocks to Grounded, a small cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a bike repair shop. It was where I used to come before sunrise during budget season, fueled by triple espressos and silent panic. Today, it felt like neutral territory. I sat down, laptop open, phone on silent. Outside, people walked past with coffees and earbuds, oblivious to the corporate implosion unfolding just down the street. And then, at 12:19 p.m., my phone buzzed. Douglas Westfield. Board chairman. I let it ring twice, then answered. Cassandra, he said, his voice sharp with concern, please tell me this is a joke. It's not. Silence. Everything in that file, the transfers, the shell companies, the corporate filing. All real. Verified. Cross-referenced. We've been hemorrhaging capital for months. Jesus. I could hear papers rustling on his end. The recording from the conference room. That's Griffin's voice. 40 minutes ago. In front of 7 witnesses. And the Mercer Holdings LLC filing? Filed this morning. Forged William's signature. Wrong registration number. He cursed quietly. We need an emergency board meeting today. Can you be at HQ by 5? I'll be there. And Cassandra, he hesitated. You just saved this company. I ended the call and finally exhaled. At 12:42 p.m., a group chat from my team lit up. Tom, Griffin just tried to access the main finance portal. IT locked him out. Jordan followed, security just walked into the floor. I think Westfield already made some calls. And then, Cassandra. He's in handcuffs. I blinked. Already? I opened Twitter, typed Griffin Mercer. Nothing yet. Good. But it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Not with 3 squad cars and an unmarked vehicle pulling into the Mercerforge parking lot. A news van wasn't far behind. My hands trembled slightly as I took a sip of my coffee. This wasn't a story I'd be able to contain. It would be a scandal. A betrayal. A headline. But above all, it would be justice. By 3 p.m., I was back in my apartment, fresh blazer pressed, phone buzzing with texts. A few were from employees. A few from clients. One from William Mercer himself, the man whose name was stitched into every piece of this company's DNA. Call me when you can. I don't know what's happening, but I trust you. That line shattered me more than anything else that day. Because despite all the deception and damage Griffin had caused, William still believed in the people he trusted. And somehow, I was still on that list. At 4:55 p.m., I walked into the boardroom. All 7 directors were already seated. The mood was heavy. No pleasantries. No introductions. Douglas stood. Let's begin. For the next hour, I walked them through everything. Naomi Chen's report. The LLC filing with forged documents. Griffin's statements about transferring $700,000 without board approval. Every line item, every bank transfer, every shell company on the screen. By the end, 3 board members looked physically ill. One, Cynthia Lawton, whispered, "How did it go so far without us seeing?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They knew. The culture of silence. The family name. The unearned trust. It had protected Griffin for years. But not anymore. Douglas folded his hands. Cassandra, would you be willing to step in as interim CEO while we conduct the formal investigation? I looked up. Yes. If it means cleaning house, rebuilding what's been broken, and restoring this company's credibility. He nodded. Then let's begin. Back in the executive suite, I opened the door to my office, and placed my box back on the desk. I reached for my UT mug, still warm from earlier that morning. Griffin had thought this was his throne. He forgot that real leadership doesn't come from inheritance. It comes from work. I returned to the Mercerforge executive suite at 8 a.m. the next morning. The building felt different. Quieter. Tense. Like it was waiting to see who would rise from the ashes. I passed familiar faces, Jordan, Tom, even Rosa at reception, and each one offered me the same expression, relief, tinged with worry. Griffin's arrest the day before had sent shockwaves not just through the boardroom, but through every office, every hallway. Half of the employees didn't even know how deep his betrayal went. The other half were wondering if they were next. I stepped into my office and found a sealed envelope waiting on my desk. No name. Just my initials handwritten in black ink, CL. Inside was a single-page letter, unsigned. You think you're the hero, but you've destroyed this company. Griffin was wrong, yes, but airing it like this will bring the whole house down. Investors are already pulling out. You'll see. You'll regret making this public. No threat. No slur. Just quiet venom. Someone inside Mercerforge still believed in Griffin. And they were willing to let me know it. At 10 a.m., the first call came in. It was from a client we'd worked with for 12 years, a Texas-based construction firm that relied on our specialized parts. We're pulling our Q1 order, the voice on the other end said flatly. Your leadership seems unstable. I tried to explain. I tried to reassure. But it didn't matter. The scandal was already seeping through the corporate fabric, staining everything it touched. I hung up the phone and stared out the window. The city was already moving on. But I couldn't. By the end of the day, 3 more clients had paused orders. 2 investors had demanded emergency calls. And 1 supplier refused to fulfill an outstanding shipment unless they received full payment upfront. Griffin had done more than steal money. He'd stolen trust. And I wasn't sure yet how to rebuild it. That evening, I went home and found William Mercer waiting at my apartment building entrance. He stood awkwardly, holding a paper bag of takeout and looking about 10 years older than he had last week. I hadn't seen him in person since his hospitalization. I figured you hadn't eaten, he said. You never do when you're handling fires. I let him in. We didn't speak for a while. Just sat on my small kitchen stools, eating Vietnamese noodles from white cartons as the sun dipped behind downtown Austin. Finally, he spoke. He used my name. I nodded. He used your name to build a lie. William stared at his hands for a long time. I always knew he wasn't ready. I just didn't want to believe he was dangerous. There was no gloating in me. No satisfaction. I had admired William Mercer most of my adult life. Seeing him broken, betrayed by his own son, was a cruelty I wouldn't have wished on anyone. You didn't fail him, I said gently. Didn't I? His eyes were red. I built a business, but I didn't build a man. That's my failure, Cassandra. Not yours. The next morning, we received news that confirmed my worst fear. One of the shell companies Griffin had created had been tied to a foreign account, an account flagged in a Department of Treasury investigation related to laundering operations through dummy vendors. It elevated Griffin's actions from corporate fraud to federal crime. Our lawyers were now coordinating with law enforcement. The SEC had been notified. There would be hearings. Possibly even a trial. Mercerforge wasn't just fighting for its reputation now. It was fighting for survival. And then, something else happened. Something I hadn't prepared for. A knock came at my office door. When I looked up, it wasn't a board member, or a client, or another reporter. It was Sophie, Griffin's ex-wife. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. Their divorce had been quiet, almost too quiet. She had left the public eye and hadn't been mentioned in the scandal until now. Can I come in? She asked. Of course. She sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. She looked different. Stronger. Like someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side with her soul intact. You should know, she said, her voice steady. I left Griffin because I caught him stealing. I froze. You knew. Not the whole thing. Just enough. I found files on his laptop. Bank transfers he couldn't explain. When I confronted him, he got aggressive. I left the next week. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Not over a Mercer. And because I was scared. She reached into her bag and handed me a flash drive. This has copies of the files I took before I left. Emails. Bank statements. He thought he deleted everything. He was wrong. I took it with shaking hands. Why now? Because watching the news, seeing you take him down the way you did, I realized maybe it's not too late to do the right thing. She stood, lingered a moment, and then said one last thing. He lied to everyone. But you were the one person he feared. That night, I plugged in the flash drive. And as the files opened, revealing even deeper fraud, offshore transfers, and a second layer of hidden accounts under Griffin's name, I knew. This wasn't just about saving Mercerforge anymore. It was about making sure no one like Griffin ever got this close to power again. The flash drive from Sophie held more than I anticipated. It didn't just confirm what I already knew, it revealed an entire second layer of fraud. Griffin hadn't been content funneling money into domestic shell companies. He'd expanded, secretly transferring funds to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland under aliases connected to consulting firms that had never done a single day of business with Mercerforge. One of the files was a scanned passport under a false name. Another showed a wire of $350,000 sent to a firm called Lyrium Global Solutions Limited. The signature on the transfer? A forged one, mine. I sat back, cold sweat clinging to my skin. He had planned not just to rob the company. He had planned to make me the fool. By the next morning, my instincts had fully shifted from defense to war footing. At 7:15 a.m., I walked into the office of Elena Brooks, our chief legal counsel. She was still in her coat, sipping her first coffee, eyes barely open. "We have a bigger problem," I said, placing a manila folder on her desk. She flipped through it. Then looked up at me. Eyes wide awake now. "He forged your signature. At least 5 times. On high-value transfers. If this hits the wrong hands without context. You're a co-conspirator," she finished. I nodded. "Unless we get ahead of it." Elena stood. "We're going to the feds. Now." By 10 a.m., we were seated across from a federal financial crimes task force, inside a secure government building in downtown Austin. I had never been in a room like this before. It was cold, windowless, lined with recording equipment. A far cry from Mercerforge's wood-paneled boardroom. I gave them everything. The flash drive. My personal audit. Naomi's forensic report. The forged filings. The video recordings. Every data point I'd gathered for 8 months. They listened in silence. Took notes. When I mentioned the forged signatures, one of the agents, an older man with graying temples and the look of someone who'd seen too much, just nodded grimly. "We've seen this before. But rarely this deep." I expected questions. Cross-examination. Suspicion. Instead, he said, "You've done more due diligence than most of our paid investigators. This evidence could lead to a full racketeering charge." My throat tightened. Racketeering. That wasn't just white-collar fraud. It was organized crime. Back at Mercerforge, word was spreading. And not just about Griffin's arrest. It was about me. Some employees called it brave. Others whispered different terms: traitor, destroyer, opportunist. I'd expected gratitude for exposing a $2.4 million theft. But companies don't always embrace the person who tears down the golden statue, even when that statue is made of rust. The emergency board meeting was called for that afternoon. The room was heavy with the kind of silence that only comes when everyone's afraid of what comes next. Douglas Westfield sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled like a judge awaiting testimony. Around him, the 6 other board members, 2 internal, 4 external, wore identical expressions of concern. "We've all read your updated report," Douglas said. "And reviewed the new evidence from Griffin's ex-wife." I nodded. My copy of the report, now over 100 pages, sat unopened in front of me. I knew every word by heart. The Department of Justice has confirmed they're opening a federal case. But we're here to decide the company's future. He paused. Looked at me directly. And your role in it. I felt the room contract around me. We've had conflicting responses from investors, said Cynthia Lawton, one of the external directors. Some say you're the hero who saved us. Others say you've exposed too much, moved too fast. The press isn't kind. Headlines about the CFO who took down a dynasty aren't great for market confidence. I understood her point. The optics were messy. But the truth mattered more than comfort. If we'd waited any longer, I said, voice firm, there would be no company left to save. No one is questioning the validity of the evidence, Douglas said quickly, shooting Cynthia a look. But the board must make decisions that protect the company's longevity. Then came the question I didn't expect. What do you want, Cassandra? He asked. The room went quiet. I hadn't prepared for that. I thought about it. About the long nights. The spreadsheets. The guilt. The rage. The moment Griffin sat in my chair like he'd earned it. And finally, I answered. I want a clean company. Full transparency. New controls. No more dynastic assumptions. And I want this to never happen again. A long pause. Do you want to be CEO? Douglas asked. Everyone looked at me. I took a breath. Yes. By the end of my first week as CEO, I realized something both obvious and dangerous. Winning the vote didn't mean winning the war. The Griffin loyalists weren't just some fringe faction. They were deep within the company, people I'd once considered allies. Department heads who owed their positions to his influence. Admins who helped him shuffle funds. Mid-level managers who looked the other way, hoping silence would shield them. And now they were panicking. Because I was shining light in every dark corner. I replaced the internal auditing team with an independent firm out of Chicago. I froze all vendor accounts pending re-verification. I even introduced mandatory ethics reviews for all employees in finance and operations. The pushback came fast. Emails mysteriously disappeared. Key spreadsheets were corrupted. One morning, a new consultant I hadn't hired walked into the lobby and said he had a signed contract with my forged signature. It was like trying to rebuild a house while someone was setting fire to the foundation. On Thursday, I arrived at the office to find chaos. Someone had leaked an internal memo to the press, one that detailed layoffs, restructuring, and emergency board actions. The memo was accurate, but it wasn't public. Within hours, we were trending on business news sites under the headline, CEO Cassandra Lane declares corporate state of emergency at Mercer Forge. By mid-afternoon, reporters were camped outside the building. Staff morale plummeted. 3 junior managers resigned. A client called and asked if the company was collapsing. I assured them it wasn't, but my voice cracked. That night, I sat in my office long past dark, staring out at the Austin skyline, wondering how many people around me still saw me as a threat. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, but I was still working. And then came a moment I never saw coming. Naomi Chen, our forensic investigator, called just before midnight. We found something. I sat up instantly. What kind of something? A fund. Off books. Hidden in Mercer Forge's old legacy systems. Tied to William Mercer, not Griffin. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. It's real. It's old. And it's dirty. She sent me the files. I opened them immediately. At first, I didn't understand. It looked like a discretionary account, normal on the surface. But the transaction history told another story. Between 2002 and 2011, nearly $3.1 million had been quietly routed through unlisted vendors and consulting groups. Small transfers, always below $25,000, spread across dozens of entities. The kicker? Several of those vendor names matched the ones Griffin had used, just slightly altered. Midwest Advisory Group became Midwest Strategic Advisors. Industrial Insights LLC became Industrial Solutions Group. The blueprint hadn't been invented by Griffin. He'd copied it from his father. The next morning, I confronted William Mercer. We met in a private conference room on the 18th floor. He looked older, frailer. But when I showed him the files, his eyes didn't widen in shock. They narrowed. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" He didn't answer. "Griffin didn't invent the shell game," I said. "He learned it from you." William closed his eyes for a long moment, then leaned back in the chair and exhaled like a man preparing to confess to something that had been rotting in his soul for years. "It started after the 2001 crash," he said. "We were hemorrhaging. No one was investing. No bank would touch us." He paused. "I moved funds. Quietly. Paid people off to keep contracts. Kept us alive long enough to recover. But I couldn't report it. Couldn't explain it. So I buried it." "You built the lie," I whispered. "I built this company," he snapped, suddenly defensive. "Every brick. Every job. You think it was clean? It was never clean. There are no saints in survival." I stared at him in disbelief. "And Griffin? He found the records a few years ago. Asked me about them. I told him to forget what he saw. Clearly, he didn't." "You think he did this to emulate you?" William's eyes met mine. "No. I think he did it because he believed if I could get away with it, so could he." I walked out of the meeting in a daze. The moral high ground I'd been standing on suddenly felt like a cliff edge. I had exposed Griffin. But the root went deeper. William had taught his son that manipulation was just another form of leadership. And Griffin had simply evolved it. I sat alone in my office for a long time. How much of Mercerforge had been built on shadow money? How many of the deals I once believed in were just sleight of hand? And if I stayed, was I preserving a legacy? Or covering it up? By evening, a third letter had arrived. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten. "You think you've uncovered the truth. But you haven't even scratched the surface. Mercerforge wasn't just Griffin's game. Be careful how deep you dig, Cassandra. You might not like what you find." This time, the letter was signed. R.S. Richard Sandwell, former head of operations. He'd retired 3 years ago. Or so we thought. I pulled up internal records. Richard still had active system credentials. That wasn't a mistake. That was a backdoor. The letter from Richard Sandwell didn't rattle me at first. But it should have. I had assumed he was gone. The old COO, quietly retired, replaced by a younger executive during the company's last reorg. I remembered his farewell luncheon, restrained, polite, the kind of send-off reserved for someone with too many secrets and too much time in the game. Now, it was clear. Richard never left. He just slipped underground. And he'd kept a back door into Mercerforge's systems the entire time. By midnight, I'd pulled the IT logs. His credentials had been used 4 times in the last month. The IP addresses weren't traceable to Texas. VPN reroutes. Someone was covering their tracks. But they'd slipped. Once. A file had been accessed 2 weeks ago, Archive 14XA. A classified folder that contained Mercerforge's original vendor contract index from 1999 to 2005. The same period William Mercer had siphoned money through the hidden fund. The implication was obvious. Richard wasn't just a passive witness to William's cover-up. He was the architect. The next morning, I sent a subpoena request through our legal counsel to force a forensic audit of all emails and communications involving Richard Sandwell dating back 20 years. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Encrypted email threads. Communications routed through offshore servers. Conversations between Richard and third-party consultants discussing off-the-books payments, hush contracts, and executive contingency pipelines. There were even messages forwarded to Griffin, some as recent as last year. Richard had coached him, not just on hiding the fraud, but on exploiting it. Same blueprint, one email read, just digitized. What your father did manually, you can do in weeks. Just don't get sentimental. Griffin had inherited more than just entitlement. He inherited a manual for corruption. I stood at the precipice of something I didn't ask for. A total implosion. This wasn't about one man's theft. This was about a culture rooted in legacy, protected by silence, and perpetuated through fear. I spent the entire next day alone in my office, staring at two open files on my laptop. One was the presentation I had planned to show investors next quarter, a hopeful vision of a rebuilt MercerForge, leaner and more ethical. The other was a full report titled, MercerForge Internal Corruption Timeline 1999 to 2025, a multi-generational case study in financial fraud. One file would save the company. The other would destroy it. That night, I met William Mercer in his private hospital suite. He looked exhausted. He had heard about Richard. And the second fund. And the emails. He didn't deny any of it. It was a different time, he said weakly. We did what we had to do to survive. And who gets to define survival? I asked. You. Griffin. Sandwell. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Cassandra. For a moment, I saw the man I had once idolized. The mentor. The builder. The father figure I never had. But that man was gone. He'd been gone for a long time. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting. Every department. Every floor. Virtual access for remote teams. The room was packed. Nervous faces. Silent tension. I stood on the stage, holding nothing but a small remote for the slideshow I wasn't going to use. I know many of you are scared, I began. You've heard stories. Seen headlines. Watched leaders you trusted fall apart in real time. You deserve to know the truth. I walked them through it. Not the sugar-coated version. The real story. The embezzlement. The shell companies. The decades of unethical practices that had festered under the Mercer name. Some gasped. Some cried. Others just looked down at their hands, as if finally understanding the weight of what they'd been complicit in through silence or ignorance. Then I told them what I was going to do. I'm submitting everything to the Department of Justice, I said. Including what happened in the early 2000s. This company will undergo a full federal investigation. Murmurs. Shock. One voice near the front, Devika, from operations, spoke up. Does that mean we could shut down? I nodded slowly. Yes. We might. But we won't lie to survive. Not anymore. The fallout was immediate. 2 board members resigned within 24 hours. 3 major clients withdrew. A PR firestorm erupted. William Mercer issued a carefully worded public statement, accepting full responsibility for certain legacy decisions, without admitting direct guilt. But the message was clear. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Then came the federal subpoena. Followed by the press. Articles ran under headlines like, The Fall of a Texas Giant, MercerForge Implodes in Scandal. From CFO to Whistleblower, Cassandra Lane Takes Down Corporate Dynasty. I spent the following month in meetings with regulators, depositions, and audits. There were nights I barely made it home. There were days I thought I had destroyed too much. But then the real messages started coming. From former employees. From whistleblowers in other firms. From interns who said, "You made me believe ethics still matter." And slowly, I began to realize. I didn't burn a legacy. I buried a lie. 2 months later, a federal resolution allowed MercerForge to continue operations under government oversight. An external trustee was assigned. Griffin's assets were seized. William voluntarily surrendered all remaining executive privileges. Richard Sandwell fled the country and was last seen boarding a plane to Dubai. And me. The DOJ offered me immunity for my cooperation. The board offered me a contract to stay on as CEO. But I declined. I gave my final speech in the same boardroom where Griffin once claimed a throne he never earned. You don't need a new CEO, I said. You need a new soul. If this company survives, it should be rebuilt by the people who believe in something more than power. I did what had to be done. But I don't want to spend my life putting out fires someone else started. I want to build something clean. From the ground up. And then I walked away. 6 months later, I started a non-profit. The Clean Ledger Project. A watchdog group that helps small companies create ethical, transparent financial systems before they fall into the same traps we did. I don't make 7 figures. I don't have a corner office. But I sleep. And that matters more. As for Griffin, he was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison for wire fraud, corporate theft, and conspiracy. His name is now permanently listed in law journals as one of the most flagrant examples of intergenerational fraud in corporate history. And for William Mercer, his once pristine legacy is now a footnote in a case study at business schools across the country. People often ask me if I regret it. If I regret destroying a legacy. If I regret airing the family's secrets. And the answer is always the same. Some legacies aren't worth saving. Some bloodlines don't deserve the throne. And sometimes, the only way to fix something is to burn it down to the bone.